All right, so hi, I'm Alex. I recently founded a studio called Connection Studio, and what we are is we're an all-life-centered design studio that focuses on the power of empathy and connection to drive impact on a value as well as social sense for organizations. And I have worked on projects from boot camps to refugee camps, but always kind of at that nexus between innovation and impact. And so I want everyone to just kind of take a second and like look at the room around us, um, and recognize that most of the objects in that room were designed by a very homogeneous group of people. Currently, they're saying the design industry is like 73% white in the United States. I also recognize that I'm a white woman, so this presentation is coming from a voice of an outsider in that experience. But one of the things I started wondering about was what would our world look like with more diverse designers in the driver's seat? How could our world actually be more responsive to more different people's sets of needs if more and different people were actually designing it? And so I got an opportunity to think about this in the practical sense and go do a project in Zimbabwe. First, I wanted to give you guys a bit of context on Zimbabwe because we never design in a vacuum. Zimbabwe was a British colony and it became independent in the 1980s and was handed over to Robert Mugabe, who became a famed dictator that I think most of us have heard of. For a time, it went well. Things were improving, health was improving, education was improving, but then he began amassing and centralizing power. In 2000, he decided to redistribute land, which in theory should have been a good thing. I think it was like 1% of the white population owned like almost all of the farming land. So he wanted to redistribute it to Black farmers. But what ended up happening is violence broke out. He didn't stop it. And so there's a lot of there was already racial tension, but there's a lot of really deep racial tension in Zimbabwe because of that, and they talk very openly about it. Also, it just wasn't done well. Like the Black people that took over the land, they weren't given the titles, so they weren't able to access bank loans, so they weren't actually able to do very much with it. They'd never done commercial farming. So a lot of the land has ended up lying unused, which is part of the reason there's a lot of famine in the country. And then in 2017, freedom was won. Mugabe was taken out in a coup that no one will call a coup. And everyone was hoping that would change things around and lead to better times. But the economic tailspin persists. The country's in hyperinflation. Currencies are routinely failing. There's a gas shortage. It takes like 2 days to fill up your tank. And there's a lot of hunger and 90% unemployment. But at Connection Studios, we like tough problems. So when Act in Africa came to us, we were quite interested in what they were talking about. They wanted to design, they have an accelerator that supports local startups in Zimbabwe. And they wanted to train a group of local people to be design researchers that could then support the startups in the accelerator, as well as start building out a nascent design industry in the country. So what we did was we designed a 3-week program that took participants from learners to leaders. And we did that through each step of the way, increasing independence. So the first part was learn by doing, really focused on teaching the design process and the design tools, but also professional skills like how to work with clients, how to do kickoff meetings, all through a locally sourced challenge. We were focused on how might we improve public transportation in Harare, the capital. And then they immediately went on to work to do actual consulting projects with corporate clients to practice what they learned. We worked with some of the biggest corporations in Zimbabwe. And then from there, they were the ones that were the best and the most skilled were pipelined into the accelerator to work as design researchers for the startups that were in the accelerator. And so the results are that we had 13 newly minted design researchers. We did 4 consulting projects with some of Zim's largest companies, and we supported, 9 startups were supported by local consultants. and we were supporting remotely. And we're going to do it again this year in a remote way because of COVID and everything like that. And so some of the learnings that we had from this program is that like decolonizing design leads to better innovation. I'm an international development design consultant that gets flown all over the world to, you know, understand context and come up with really innovative solutions. But people who are actually from there just understand the context in such a more profound way that they can skip over that whole step. And they're already like more embedded in, you know, what would be accessible, desirable, etc. So they're able to come up with better solutions than outsiders usually are. And then the other learning is that like with this process, we can go from the traditional power structure of, you know, like a white Zimbabwean explaining to the Black Zimbabweans how things are done, to a new power structure where we're bringing like the Black Zimbabweans in as professional leaders that are adding value to these large organizations. So it's really like the designers in a society do hold a lot of power. And so if we shift who the designers are, we also shift where the power lies. Another learning that we had is actually the process of designing builds bonds. So in this photo, we have, there's a majority tribe and a minority tribe in Zimbabwe, and they've also fought and shed blood between each other. We have people from the majority and the minority tribe, and we have a white Zimbabwean all working together, all collaborating in a horizontal relationship. You don't see this very much in Zimbabwe. So the actual process of design can bring people together and show and have them cross over lines that they wouldn't cross in other spaces. But there's still work to be done. One of the things that I'm focused on now is how do we decolonize the tools that we use. A lot of the frameworks and tools that we have, we bring in from the global north, which is based on a certain ideology. I'm quite interested in how we can start, we can have people from different parts of the world and different life experiences creating their own tools and upstreaming them into the global design narrative. And then the other key part is like focusing on community design. So if we want design to really build bonds and shift power, we need to not just like do the design process, we also need to focus on the community design principles. And what we practice is first building shared identity. So how do we shift the identity away from my tribe or the color of my skin or my ethnicity to I'm a design researcher? And by building that shared identity, people are able to work together in a whole new way. The second part is creating mental and physical space for interaction. And so actually like bringing people together and have them work together over time allows them to see the other person as a person. And also ensuring those relationships are horizontal. It's not like always the person who's traditionally in power mentoring the person who's not traditionally in power. And then the third is creating shared humanity. So that's kind of like going beyond the like professional identity and focusing on like, what do you have in common? Like, oh, we're both creatives. Like, oh, we both have had this shared life experience. So actually designing for that into these type of programs. And that's it. Let's connect. I'm really like these talks have been really interesting, and I'm really hoping to continue the conversation with all of you about anything.